You are listening to the Common Ground podcast, where social justice topics are discussed so that mutual solutions can be considered. This program was created by me, Ziggy Kozicki. You can join these conversations by following Common Ground podcast on Facebook. This program was created through the facilities of the MCTV network, a service of the City of Midland. Charter, DirecTV, MCTV, and the City of Midland are not responsible for the content of this program. The views presented do not necessarily represent those of Charter, DirecTV, the City, or MCTV. If you would like to learn about creating community podcasts like this one, contact MCTV at 989-837-3474. Thank you. Hey, welcome to U.S. Common Ground. I'm Ziggy Kozicki. Today's program is about mental illness. My guest is going to be Tony Carolan, Anthony Carolan, a social worker with years of experience in the mental health field. Someone who has worked directly in a variety of different communities, and a friend of mine from high school, somebody that I also worked with in the mental health field. I've worked in mental health for about 50 years, and still active as a psychologist, working with patients. So, but we're going to talk today about mental illness and the big taboo. Even though we're inclined to think that we're modern and so forth, mental illness is still misunderstood, something that many people are uncomfortable with, even though 1 in 5 adults, around 60 million people, experience mental illness each year in the United States. And the rates are higher among young adults between 18 and 25. Females also have a higher rate, and certain racial groups, particularly multicultural individuals, struggle also. So, this is something that is a big part of our community life, big part of what we need to deal with to establish common ground. But yet we still have difficulty dealing with mental illness. It's almost as if we don't really understand it because we don't want to understand it. And maybe Tony and I can talk a little bit about that. Tony, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Ziggy. Thank you. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Tony's in Traverse City, and I'm broadcasting from Midland, Michigan.
Yeah, what you say is so true, Zig. The antecedent to the misunderstanding is because people don't see it unless you're directly involved in it with a family member. And if you're a victim of severe mental illness, severe and persistent mental illness, your insight is limited if you don't have consistent treatment. So you just don't see it. In my career, I would bump into people and I would tell them, yeah, I work in mental health. They say, oh, that's great. We need more of that. Everybody agrees we need more of that. But who gets it, who pays for it, and what is it is very difficult to understand unless you've had the opportunity as a professional or a family member that sees people through that spectrum when they're functioning and when they're responding to treatment, and then when they're having difficulties, and then when they're in the most dire psychotic states. It's hard to understand because you don't see that.
Well, we see a lot of people anxious, and about 40 million people are in some state of an anxiety disorder, and we tend to treat that a little differently. We try to provide a way for people to be less anxious. One of those is, we let people smoke a lot of cannabis or drink a lot of alcohol or, self-medicate in one way or another to deal with their anxiety. Maybe find an addiction to be preoccupied with instead of being anxious. But it seems as if the prevalence of mental disorders particularly around adolescence, has been neglected. And, what we are seeing is that about half of our adolescents, 49% of our adolescents are experiencing some form of mental disorder right now in the United States. That's a pretty high statistic. And, the now many of them work their way through it and get into adult life, and they get through that experience, and they're better off. But the fact that so many of our young people are experiencing these kinds of issues sometimes doesn't get the proper attention. And so we shouldn't be surprised when we have, for instance, particularly in very stressful communities where there are very limited resources, maybe more violence or more drug use or more alcohol use or other kinds of addictive behaviors as people try to deal with their anxiety, particularly younger people. And you and I, we can relate to when we were adolescents. I remember driving around with you, and your dad isn't around to hear this, but we would be
I'll be careful now.
we were drinking alcohol,
Yes.
driving around in the country,
Right.
trying to find a party, hanging out with a bunch of guys, just trying to figure out what to do, dealing with our, adolescent tensions or whatever. And, not trying to harm anybody or do anything bad, but we were using the means that were available to us. And I guess we did okay. And I remember you drove pretty well, even though you'd have a few beers, and your dad would not be happy to hear that. So, I think, what we're really needing to consider is that the number of people that receive mental health treatment has increased over time. So in 2022, 59 million adults received mental health treatment in the United States. 59 million. So there is treatment that's taking place. Now, whether it's the right kind of treatment, whether it's long lasting or whatever, that's another matter altogether. And some of that has to do with payment, insurance, or if a person doesn't have insurance, having to reach in their pocket or whatever, or whether the community provides those services. And let's talk a little bit about that. Community mental health, which I worked in for a number of years, and we were supposed to provide mental health services to the community. I worked in addiction services, which were supposed to provide addiction services, drug treatment, alcohol treatment in the community for a number of years. And so I have some personal experiences with that. What's your thoughts about it, Tony? Where are we with the community mental health from your perspective?
Well, I think it's getting better, but I think you mentioned the Engler administration in that period of time, where in Michigan, as you know, because you're a politician, Sig, and you pay attention to these politics.
Well, I'm not really a politician, but okay.
Well,
I have
okay,
held
you're
political
political.
office.
That was meant positively.
Okay.
But in Michigan, we community mental health was dissolved basically, and it was replaced with a behavioral health program, a federal behavioral health program called Medicaid.
Yeah.
And they use terms like severe and persistent illness. They weren't so concerned about mental health. They were designed to treat acute, severe, and persistent mental illnesses. So the concept of a community mental health programming was eroded. The funding pattern went in that 20-year period from almost total state and county to what exists today is like 99% federal government, Medicaid. Yeah. And the institutions don't like how Medicaid reimburses. So
yeah, Medicaid is the least popular form of reimbursement, I think, for any kind of medical services. And John Engler, who we're talking about, was governor during a time when his plan was to just essentially close down all of the facilities that he could as a cost savings and shift all the burden to the federal government, get it out of the state budget. And as Tony mentioned, put it into the Medicaid system, which is chronically underfunded. It's never received adequate funding from its inception. And it was really kind of the fallback position from the Johnson administration. You know, the Lyndon Johnson wanted to give Medicare to every American. Every American would have had Medicare. It would have been universal health coverage. And Harry Truman had the same idea. Dwight Eisenhower had the same idea. John Kennedy had the same idea, but it's never come to fruition. Bernie Sanders has talked about it, you know, Medicare for all being universal coverage for everybody, and essentially eliminate Medicaid. You know, just don't have a state program, have a federal program that covers everybody. But we haven't gone there. Other countries have got universal health coverage. Most of the OECD countries that we compare ourselves to have universal health coverage, which means when a person is born, they have health insurance that covers them until they die. And they pay into it from their taxes and so forth, but they never have to go to the marketplace. They never have to worry about whether they're going to have coverage. They've got coverage.
Right. What so true. And one of the impact of what that shift did is that the community mental health agencies had the concept that they would treat somebody, stabilize them, pass them on to a community therapist or a primary care worker, and the treatment would be just an episodic thing, you know.
Yeah.
There wasn't the concept like we have. You have a primary care provider, and you try to stick with the primary care provider for your health benefit, and you don't, you just take for granted that health issues are ongoing and episodic. They don't stop. You don't just say, "Oh, I don't need to see a primary care person anymore. I'm healthy," and that concept or that understanding has not gotten through to the concept of mental illness and mental health.
Yeah, you had mentioned that we're really only really focusing on serious mental illness, and partly because these people don't adjust well. And it's roughly, about 15 million people in the United States, or about 6% of the population, that really falls into that category, which means that all the rest of the people don't receive the proper attention. And even the seriously mentally ill people don't receive the proper attention because they're often timed out. They have so many days that they're supposed to get well, and they get booted into the community, whether the community is ready for them or not. And there aren't any long-term community services that, fit everybody's lifestyle or expectations. We've got group homes, we've got some daycare programs that are going on. But the ranks of people who provide the services are thin. The budget for it is not very robust. And we still have the issue that exists where many people don't understand mental illness and treat mentally ill people as if they're lepers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And yeah.
Well, that's just a good, but that goes back to a non-monetary thing where you can train people, educate people. There's so many people that feel that you can just like, what did our high school football coaches say when you hurt your leg? Work it out, run it out.
Yeah.
You're gonna somebody with a terrible biological brain disorder that is in treatment and doing well and doing everything is invariably going to meet somebody out there that has a very primitive understanding and says, "Oh, you shouldn't be taking medication. Medications are bad. You should just get a job and get a hobby." So,
yeah. Well, even somebody who's addicted, they say, "Well, they should just stop using drugs." Well, yeah, the brain disorder is such that they don't feel right when they're not using drugs. And I think that they have to realize it is a brain disorder. It's not that they're, they want to even be in that situation. My experience working years with addicted people is that they'd love to be free of it, but they don't know what to do instead. And the alternatives are not comfortable to them. Being under the influence of a drug helps them to cope with the unsteadiness that they feel in life. And at the same time, they realize it's also killing them and also creating all kinds of other problems. So it's a double approach avoidance situation. Something you want, something you want to avoid, uh, but you can't get out of it. It's a trap.
Yeah, that's very true. One of the things that I was proud of our agency, and I had some participation in it, was the understanding of co-occurring disorders, the understanding of addiction issues and severe mental illness existing in the same
Yeah,
person.
yeah.
And so,
Comorbidities, yeah.
yeah, and so I mean, we went through a period, or I say we as of being part of the system, if if there was an indication of an addictive disorder, we would push them out of the mental health system and try to get them into the addiction treatment system, and that wasn't always good or easy. So when they both have to be looked at and attended to, so I mean, it was only a matter of we didn't even, as a professional organization, we didn't even recognize co-occurring disorders,
Yeah.
20 years ago.
Yeah.
We didn't train people in it. The therapists didn't know about
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. I worked in both sides of that when I was working in the mental health field at the time. We didn't treat alcoholics, drug addicts. And when I worked in the drug treatment field, we didn't treat people who were mentally ill.
Right.
And it was like, well, where does the person go who has both these things? Who knows? They're not coming here because they're mentally ill. Well, they're not coming here because they have a drug problem. And it was like, do we not kind of see that this is a person? Yeah, I think we've gotten better, but we still have those walls up. I mean, there's still people that I know that are addicted, and they say, well, at least I'm not mentally ill. It's like, well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
But the interesting thing is, even with addiction, we are now much more comfortable with people drinking a little bit more than they should, and maybe smoking a little bit more, or eating too many gummies, because it's okay. It's okay because it's a way to deal with anxiety and stress. Uh, and so we've really kind of uh, made it more comfortable for people, at least with anxiety disorders, to deal with some of that issue. But we seem to have a much harder problem dealing with these serious mental disorders or these organic disorders that exist. Maybe partly because we don't understand them enough, or we haven't researched enough to look at, what might be some strategies to deal with it. Um, Mental health is definitely underfunded. I mean, we don't give it the kind of funding that we give to cancer treatment or to treatment for even diabetes or those kinds of things. So the research dollars aren't there to really take a good long look at this in terms of what we can do to change it. And maybe there's another thing to keep in mind is that maybe on the, if you think about a bell-shaped curve, some people are going to be crazy. And some of that crazy might be that you have an Albert Einstein or somebody that thinks way outside the box and thinks about things that, I'm sure that a lot of people, when they knew Einstein was thinking about atomic structure and so forth, were thinking, boy, that guy's weird, I mean, what's he doing, what is all that about? Yeah, so we don't always appreciate the fact that differences in the way people think aren't necessarily bad. They're just different.
Yeah. Right.
Well,
I
think
there's always, I mean, like back to the mental health thing. I mean, people criticize the concept. They say, well, you can't throw money at a problem. Well, that's true to a certain extent. But if you throw a lot of money at a problem, like going to the moon, you get to the moon.
yeah, exactly. If the objective is to, a moonshot. Yeah. Well, most recently there's a president who wanted a moonshot to treat cancer. And I think he started on that, but he's not president anymore. So I don't know if that moonshot is still being funded the way it was at one time. But you're right. If you really dedicate a lot of resources, and the objective is to, for instance, adequately deal with mental health issues, we would do it. We would have the counselors or the resources in place, or we would provide avenues for people who have mental health issues to still be successful in their community, to still grow as they get older, and not necessarily be shunned or criticized. And I think we did that, or tried to do it, in the school system by providing services for people who had developmental issues or other kinds of concerns that needed, so that they could be worked into the fabric of the school environment. Maybe not as successfully as we could have, but there was an effort, and there still is one going on. One of the people I was talking to just recently works with these children in the Bay City school system, actually, that have special needs, and many of them are not able to function in the regular classroom, and so they provide resources for them to be able to be in the school, but working with a smaller group of other students who have issues, and with teachers who are specially trained and willing to go the extra mile to give these people an education. So, we can make accommodation, but that costs money, and it also requires an understanding and acceptance by the community that those people matter, and that they should get a shot, an opportunity to catch the ball, so to speak, and many of them are motivated to actually get better, and they do, but it's not an easy path for them. I think, and I can speak from my own family, every family has mental health issues. That's our common ground. We all know somebody in our family or in our immediate community who has a mental health issue. And so we all have something to work with. Now, how we deal with that is different, and what we decide that we're going to do to, make life normal, even though the situation is different than what people expect. But, maybe the new normal is to accept the fact that we're always going to have people with mental health issues. Some of them are temporary. They may be periodic, transitory kind of experiences that come because of social determinants or changes in health or whatever. And some of them are permanent, that don't leave the person, don't leave the life. Person, is going to deal with that right to the very end of their lifetime, and that the cure for it is to actually accept the person and be able to work with them. But I think that the real challenge for all of us is to really recognize that we have to do more to improve mental health around every place that people live, and so forth. And that even includes in politics and in industry and in government and in other places. We need to look out for how to improve mental health, so we don't have situations where people are causing harm for others because their mental health issues aren't being dealt with. And we
Yeah.
can work people to death, and it,
Well,
that's not a good thing.
well, that's the hope, like you say, and I think it is getting better. I hope we can run to it and figure out that it's a good idea for everybody in the community, rather than be forced to deal with it because of mass terrible, devastating things that happen in the community.
Yeah, I think sometimes we are impacted by the world outside of our own control. For instance, right now in the United States, we're going through a very stressful time. I'm not going to get into it in this podcast. Actually, my next guest in my next podcast is going to have an opportunity to talk about that and how democracy is changing around us. And that's a stressor. And, most people can't do anything about it. It's not like they can, pick up the phone and call the president of the United States or whatever. Try talking to a U.S. senator. If you can reach one, good luck. But I
Right.
remember and this is not that long ago, when I was growing up, the U.S. representative from Bay County would have breakfast every morning at a diner, Monday through Friday. And if you wanted to talk to him, he just went there and had a cup of coffee and sat next to him. And he'd say, "What do you want? What do you want to talk about?" Made himself available and would write things down, jot things down, or just tell you right to your face, "No, your kid's not getting into West Point. He doesn't have a good enough grade point average, and we only send 2 people there. We send the very best, and it's got whatever." But we used to have access to people that we felt we needed to have access to, and then that's become much harder to do. Now you deal with representatives of representatives in so many things.
Wow. Well, I've really enjoyed the discussion here, Zig. It's just a little frustrated by the technology because I'm not as used to it as you are. But
well, yeah,
good conversation.
Good conversation. Well, if you think about technology, could you ever imagine when you were in high school that you would be having a podcast with one of your high school schoolmates talking about issues like this, and then being able to share that with other people?
No, not really.
No.
I was impressed and involved with the 8-tracks. I like those.
8-tracks. Do you remember those in cars? How big they were?
Oh yeah, great. They're great.
Yeah, they were about the size of a box.
And all you had to do was push it in. That was it.
Yeah, well, we do have more technology now. But I want to thank you, Tony, for indulging me with your expertise and knowledge. But maybe I can ask you for a closing pearl of wisdom, because I know you've always said some good thoughts. What's your thoughts about all this that we're gathering together here?
Wow, Zig, you're putting me really on the spot here.
I did.
You got to give me some. It's our knowledge is getting better. The whole AI, the whole imaging thing, the medical imaging is getting better. We've got tools. The medication industry or research is at its infancy. There wasn't even any medication, you would know. Maybe in the 70s, there wasn't even really any medication. So we've got opportunities. We've got opportunities. We got to seize them.
Yeah, I like that. So you do have a pearl of wisdom, which is that we have to harness our knowledge and technology to improve mental health, just like we would to send somebody to the moon or do something like that. That we need to make this a priority, and we need to fund it adequately, but also get behind it. I think the common touch here is that we should all be looking out for the mental health of everybody we come in contact with, and that could start by simply just communicating with people, saying hello to them, recognizing them, spending a few minutes understanding who they are and what they're about. And those kinds of things might break down into more common ground kind of opportunities. But I think you're also right. We need to make sure that we provide the best services we can for those people who have serious problems and really don't know what else to do and are looking to us to give them some hope. And we need to do that for them, for our families, for our communities, for everybody else. You've been listening to U.S. Common Ground. This is Ziggy Kozicki. You can find us at Facebook if you want to make comments. Please listen to our programs. Appreciate your comments, but also appreciate the guests like Tony who have come on. And if you're interested in suggesting some topics or some things for us to cover in the future, please do so. Thank you so much. Have a good day. And Tony, I hope to see you again soon, and maybe we can enjoy each other's company in some way or another. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to the Common Ground podcast, where social justice topics are discussed so that mutual solutions can be considered. This program was created by me, Ziggy Kozicki. You can join these conversations by following Common Ground podcast on Facebook. This program was created through the facilities of the MCTV Network, a service of the City of Midland. Charter, DirecTV, MCTV, and the City of Midland are not responsible for the content of this program. The views presented do not necessarily represent those of Charter, DirecTV, the City, or MCTV. If you would like to learn about creating community podcasts like this one, contact MCTV at 989-837-3474. Thank you.